Casa Vallejo, where you first opened the shop, it's like a century-old building, no?
Yeah.
And it survived all this time. And then so you opened the bookstore there. And when did you start noticing that you had non-human inhabitants in the store?
Books started falling off the shelves randomly. And then we started to feel that there was something more to this than books just falling off the shelves.
We'd open the shop for a couple of weeks and Noli Me Tangere would be on the floor. Like consistently. And then after a couple of weeks, Philly started being on the floor na instead of Noli Me Tangere. And we were like, oh,
She's done
reading.
with Noli, and now she's reading the Philly. Eventually, we named her.
Yeah, Carmen.
Carmen. The world has gone bonkers. We now live in George Orwell's 1984. War is peace, ignorance is strength, and crazy is normal. How do you stay sane? Fifi and Padma Perez are the proprietors of Mt Cloud Bookshop in Baguio. Fifi is a teacher and Padma is an organizer of the Agam Agenda, which seeks to bring the arts and humanities into the climate discourse. Yeah, so everybody says Filipinos don't read, so you guys went and opened the bookstore. What is the logic there?
We love books. Part of the logic, if you can call it that, behind it was we grew up in Baguio. We were born and raised in Baguio, which aside from being a tourist destination is also a major university town for our region. And we felt like a bookshop was a real missing piece. I mean, there are bookshops in Baguio, but they sold mainly school supplies and textbooks
Or secondhand books.
books. And yes, we were lucky to have seen many different kinds of bookshops and what a bookshop can be, and we've fallen in love with such places.
And when we were growing up, there were bookshops in Baguio. But and by the time we decided to open Mt. Cloud, there were none, and there hadn't been any for several years. And like we used to get left in bookshops. My mom would go to the market and leave us in Bookmark on Session Road, and we would sit there and just read books. And it was a really happy memory. So
Yes.
we were like, oh, why don't we have one in Baguio anymore? So that was part of the idea to open the bookshop.
Yeah, I used to get, whenever my mom went to the supermarket, to Makati Supermart, they always had comics. So I would get left there, and then sometimes they would forget me. So, or
She
maybe
left
that was
without
just an
you.
excuse. Yeah, so how could Baguio have survived with no bookstore for a long time?
I guess people were reading a lot of secondhand books because there was no
Yeah.
bookstore. But if you go to the market, there used to
There
be
were
areas
stalls
that,
that had-
had books for rent or that you could buy. And along Session Road, there used to be an old couple. I haven't seen them in a while. That set up stall in the stairwell of an old building, and they had old books there that you could browse and buy from.
So you decide to open a bookshop. What's the next step?
What happened was we always had this dream of having a bookshop, and that was all it was, a dream. We weren't looking for a spot, but when this spot where we used to
So
be,
it just happened.
yes,
So,
when it became
I guess
available,
it was the right time, no?
Yeah,
Everything just-
in Casa Vallejo, and then we said, this is it.
Yes, and along with your bookshop, you inherited a ghost. But wait, can we offer you some spritzes?
Yes, please.
Okay, Gamba, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Casa Vallejo, where you first opened the shop, it's like a century-old building, no?
Yeah, it was first built in 1904. It was a dormitory for the workers that were building Baguio City during the American colonial administration.
And it survived all this time. And then so you opened the bookstore there. And when did you start noticing that you had non-human inhabitants in the store? And I don't mean cats.
Books started falling off the shelves randomly. And then we started to feel that there was something more to this than books just falling off the shelves.
We'd open the shop for a couple of weeks and Noli Me Tangere would be on the floor. Like consistently.
Always.
Even at night when we closed, it wasn't there. When we'd open, it was on the floor. And then after a couple of weeks, Philly started being on the floor na instead of Noli Me Tangere. And we were like, oh,
She's done
reading.
with Noli, and now she's reading the Philly. Eventually, we named her.
Yeah, Carmen.
Carmen because?
I think she kept dropping one of Carmen Nakpil's books.
Okay.
So the clerks
What-
at
how
that
did-
time
How
decided,
did you know that she was a she?
We just kind of assumed.
kind of assumed. Also, our first clerk
Oh yeah, he
kind of
was.
had a third eye.
Yeah.
And
So
so-
he
and
said
so
he
female.
felt that she was female. He said there were others there, but really
There
the
were
active
others?
ones. Yeah,
Yeah.
but he
They
said
had
they
the
were
book
just
club
shapes.
based in Mt Cloud.
The others were just shapes and kind of just wandering around, but she was very purposeful.
There were times he would text us when he was closing already and he would say, ang dami kong kasama dito.
You know, now that I think about it, if there's an afterlife, it wouldn't be bad to be trapped in a bookstore. huh?
That's always been my idea of paradise. When I die, I want to end up in Blackwell's in Oxford.
A very particular.
A very particular one because there's a coffee shop, so I can live there. I don't think they had booze.
So you'd
go
have
out
to
for that.
you'd have to start stashing the,
Yeah.
the booze. But so why Mount Cloud?
What's
we
our
still don't
nanay's
know.
email address?
It was our mom's email address, and for her it was a Zen koan, I think.
Yeah.
Where you could read it kasi as empty cloud or empty as in walang laman. EMPTY. So that's kind of our play on words where we started off as empty and then it became Mountain Cloud as we got more and more books. And then when we recently moved again, we held a empty cloud open mic where we had emptied the bookshop, our original location of all the shelves and all the books, and we just filled it with people, everybody that used to love coming to the shop, and so everybody
Our
talked
last
about their
party
stories.
there.
That was
Yeah.
our stories, and then we locked the door and gave back the keys. That
Yeah,
was
and
it.
I remember you're telling me that first people had to get used to the idea of a bookstore as opposed to a library.
Yes.
Yes.
And actually, a bookstore that sold books. Like
Yeah.
we used to get a lot of questions. Somebody would come in.
May
and,
Xerox
Pwede
kayo?
ba magpa-Xerox? Or may envelopes po ba kayo? And the clerk would say, hindi po, books lang po yung binibenta namin. Di ba bookstore kayo?
Ah, yeah, because people
Oh, yeah.
always associate bookstores with
people
school
would
supplies.
look for-
Why did you decide to specialize in Filipiniana? Although, I have to thank you because it's a little distressing, you go into a bookstore in the Philippines and if you're looking for books by and about the Philippines, they're usually exiled to a little corner in the back.
In a tiny shelf.
Yes.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
in, labo-labo na all the local publishers while the latest, American young adult books are all in front, rows and rows of them.
Well, it was kind of accidental and circumstantial because our ambition at the start was to specialize in Asian literature and Asian books until we realized how difficult it is for a small bookshop to bring in books from elsewhere in Asia.
Importation.
Yeah, so
Even
we,
if books are supposed to be tax-free, right?
supposed to be,
Supposed to
but
be.
we would get charged by customs. So we started with what we could get. And then when at some point we realized this is it. This is our collection and let's build up regionally, like for the Cordillera. So that's how the focus grew. And from very early on, we knew we weren't going to do this thing of having Filipiniana on one shelf and then Indonesia, Thailand, whatever. If we ever
It's
got
great.
to
So
do...
it's all Philippine
it's
books and then
all-
a foreign bookshelf.
Yes. And we realized, so we had that limited space now because we were in a small space in Casa Vallejo, that there were enough Filipiniana books to fill that space completely. You know how you
Yeah.
have this impression that there aren't enough of those books because nga, if you go to
Right.
regular bookstores, it's such a tiny space.
And suddenly, Filipinos realize that we've written so many books.
Yes.
And I remember how the bookstore has adjusted to social media as both an instrument for promotion and also an annoyance. Yes, because people would go in and take selfies. It's like if you're going to take selfies, buy a book.
Yeah.
We can tell now from the moment a person enters if this person is here to take selfies or to buy books. So the ones who come in holding a phone or with a camera hanging from here, and they come in like this. Pictures, selfies. If they come in and they make a beeline for the shelves and they're like that, bibili to. This person's gonna buy.
That's one of the things about moving the shop, because before we were in the middle of town and in a building that had other things, a spa, hotel,
That
and
fabulous
restaurant.
yes.
Yeah.
Hill
So we have
Station.
people that would really just walk in, like, because they'd be waiting for a table at Hill Station. They didn't know we
Yeah.
were there. And so that's when we had also a lot of people just taking pictures. But now that we're kind of farther away, there's not much else yet to
Around
see where we
us.
are. We
So
get
it's become
more-
a destination.
Yes, for readers mostly.
And here's
Instagrammers.
where the annoying social media can be helpful.
Yes,
Now
because
people will realize
people-
that you have moved.
and where we are, because they still get confused. Like it's taken us quite some time to get people to not go to Casa Vallejo. Like if I go to the restaurant, they're still like, "Ma'am, ang daming naghahanap sa inyo."
Yeah, and the thing is, the original site of Mt. Cloud had its regulars na, and
Yeah.
I remember the crying chair.
We had a chair upstairs.
A bean- was
Actually,
it a bean
a
bag?
pillow. It was a big
Yeah.
pillow. And
Yeah, and it was a loft type thing
Yes.
because it was such a small space. Yeah.
so there was one spot upstairs, and for a couple of weeks, we'd have somebody come in almost every day, and he'd just go upstairs and sit there and cry for about an hour.
The therapy
Like,
chair.
yeah, quietly. And so we'd check every once in a while. And then he'd leave. And that would be it. He didn't say hello to us. He didn't
It was
read
a
books.
safe space
Yeah.
for him to
You know,
just
it could be that Carmen was,
talking to it.
was giving them
Actually.
a nice little therapeutic talk.
yeah.
So do you still have the therapy chair in your new branch?
We have lots more chairs now, but I don't think we have as many quiet, small spaces where they can just sit.
Be alone.
Oh, and
Yeah.
more importantly, did you bring the ghosts?
No, they were invited, but I think they like being in a 100-year-old building.
And I think they were there when we got there, so they kind of just occupied the space that we were occupying also. And then when we
Carmen really acted up in the days before we left,
That's
though.
true.
Oh, like how?
She was
Yeah.
really
dropping
dropping
things
on everybody.
We have it on CCTV even of
Wow!
the manager sitting at the counter and typing, and there's a bag on the shelf behind her, and there's
It doesn't
no
even
sudden
look
movement,
precarious the way the
or
bag is. Like
anything.
it was really tucked into the shelf.
and it just falls on her head.
The literate poltergeist.
Yeah, she was. I think she was
upset,
pissed
yeah.
that we were
Yeah.
leaving.
Well, she can always visit.
Yeah.
But there, so what have you learned about Filipino reading habits since you opened the shop? I would say, what do Filipinos like to read? For instance, what have been your consistent bestsellers?
Well, the comic section sells a lot, so we have
Yeah,
like,
and Manix Abrera
Yes.
Yeah.
used Mt. Cloud for some comics.
yeah,
And he popularized our ghost.
Yes.
He did a few strips on Carmen.
in the Inquirer, yeah. So we get a lot of comics, and when they do have launches, like when Manix Abrera has a launch, so when we were in Casa Vallejo, we had a line around the block, and he was signing from 6 p.m. to midnight.
Oh.
Because people come from all over, not just from Baguio. When they hear that an author is coming, they come from Nueva Ecija, Pangasinan,
Nice,
La
yeah.
Union, and they get on the bus right after. And then our Cordillera section, I think because we've really made that one of our strong points,
Yeah.
is that we have books on the Cordillera, the region that we're in.
Yes, and as a public service, let me just say it's Cordillera. It's already plural. Please stop adding an S, because it's plural. Yeah.
That's our, we check that every
Is there
book that comes
advocacy?
in. Every book that comes in, we're like, hey!
Return to publisher. There is an S. Yeah.
And then, so we had this book about Baguio called The City of Pines, and it was a history book of Baguio. And it was published I don't know, now probably 20 years ago
Yeah.
already.
More.
Before we had opened, the publisher had just been sitting on her original stock.
Trying to move
Trying
them.
to move it, selling in gift shops. And when we opened the shop, in about 3 or 4 years, we sold everything she had. And she had been sitting on it prior for 15 years, not being able to sell it.
So maybe this constant complaint that Filipinos don't read. If you give them a bookstore with things that they actually want to read, they will figure it out.
I think
Yeah.
so. Like also a lot of our clientele, we have a lot of clientele online that order books from General Santos, from Iloilo, from Bacolod, and we mail it out. And it's because they don't have access to the book. So when they see us post, or when they see an author post that it's
They ask
available
us
in
to
Mt.
ship
Cloud,
it
they
to
send
them.
us messages and they're
Yeah.
like, can you ship us books?
Cool.
And originally we didn't want to, but then we realized that that's a pretty interesting market. So we
Yes.
started shipping
And
them
I
out.
think online retail is really booming now.
Yeah.
Thanks in no small part to the traffic in Metro Manila. So,
Yeah.
And there are a lot of independent bookstores in the Philippines.
There
Yes,
are.
there are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember you had an idea for a subscription service.
Yes,
that's
still
still
running.
Yeah, tell us about the subscription service.
In fact, we're changing it now. We're going to do a holiday release. So what we do is we ask customers questions, little about themselves, what they like to read, their reading habits, and then based on those questions, we choose a book for them. And so the subscription program is about 3 months, and every month you receive at least one book. Sometimes we throw in 2 or 3, depending on the price points. And then we mail them to you, so you receive a nice brown package with your books.
It's sort
in
of
it.
like the Book of the Month Club.
Yes.
that
Kind of.
from ancient times.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
And
that
now
was
they'll be
our-
able to do it by genre, so they can say we want poetry
or
children's books.
children's books, just not art books, because art books are expensive. So we're like, that
Yes.
doesn't fit in our price range.
So do you believe the conventional wisdom that Filipinos don't read?
No, definitely not. I mean, Filipinos do read. I think a lot of the time it's just a matter of not being able to get the books.
So did the subscription service, do you think that it really helped people to get into the habit of?
Yeah, learn more about Filipino literature also, because a lot of the people, because when we ask who's your favorite author, what are your favorite books, everything that came up was international. Stephen King, Harry Potter. They weren't so familiar with Filipiniana books. I think that's part of the excitement of the subscription, is they didn't know that there were books like that were written by Filipinos. There's Filipino sci-fi, there's Filipino
Yeah.
fantasy, and they're like, oh, meron pala. So I think that added a lot to the excitement of receiving the books.
Yeah, but it's weird that we know what Stephen King is doing, but people don't even have no idea that there are writers next door.
Yeah. One of the taglines is also to read outside your
Your
comfort zone. So
Right.
we encourage people to choose beyond what they would
I think it's the
usually-
same as movie viewing. People want to go to a movie starring artista that they recognize.
Yes.
And then when people read books, they want books by authors they already know, which is why many of us are completists. So you specialize in Filipiniana books. You have some idea of the range of books that have been written. Are there any particular books that you have been looking for that you think the audience needs that have not been written? I'm sure there are some people out there listening who are thinking, what kind of book should I write?
Definitely more about Philippine natural history. There are textbooks and there are reference books, but kulang pa. We need more of that, and I feel like
For
that's
instance, the natural history of
the islands, the archipelago, our biodiversity, because those are some of the things that we have and we're not so aware of.
that's true, and
Yeah.
actually that's our strength.
Exactly.
Our biodiversity,
Yeah.
yeah.
We talk about it a lot in school and stuff, but there's nothing else to read other
Yeah.
than
Other
these are the
than-
types we have.
Yeah.
That's it. And
Other than scientific books, I mean, you know how essays about the environment
Right.
and about animals are also really make for really good reading. I haven't seen anything like that for us yet here, for the species we have, the ecosystems we have yet.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Another thing would be more chapter books for younger readers. So we have a lot of good children's picture books. But then for like intermediate readers, maybe
And young
aged
adults.
7 to 12, that's a really blank space. Like our shelf for that is so small because
Yeah.
there aren't very many. Harry Potter, for example, where that is, that's kind of a gap in Filipino literature because
that
everything else is
particular age group.
older.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's for
Which in my
older.
generation was the Nancy Drew books.
Yes,
Exactly.
things like that,
Yeah.
books like that. There's not enough.
So, based on what you said, since there's a lot of research going on, not in natural history, the sciences, in archaeology, maybe we need the researchers to pair up with writers
Yes.
to write books
That
for
would
the
be so
popular books,
That
not
would be-
scientific.
Yes,
Yes.
that would be amazing. And I think like what we always say is, okay, in my work now we're talking about about climate change and how we all have to face up to it and deal with it. But if we're gonna keep using jargon to talk about it, nobody's gonna relate to that.
Right.
So that's precisely what we're trying to do, is to get the poets and the storytellers and the artists to say something to us
Yes,
about
because,
climate
you
change
know,
that we can recognize and
We're
we can
like one of the
feel.
first fronts.
And the thing is, again, there's so many children's books that are picture books on these topics, like about typhoons, earthquakes, natural disasters, and all, even biodiversity.
Yeah,
But
and then
it's
when they
for
hit their
kids
teens,
na talaga.
pag-aartista na ang,
Yeah, which is
ang
they're the
interest
ones that
nila.
are
Love
really
stories,
they're the ones
yeah.
that are really also affected by everything
that
that's going
generation.
around them.
Yeah. And how can we expect them to protect something that they don't know, right? So if they only learn about it in school, that's boring. And then if there's nothing more engaging than that, forget it.
Now that you've mentioned it, you know how in the American publishing they always have popular histories, and I've never seen a
Yes.
popular history of the Philippine Revolution. It's like battle
Yes.
by battle, who
Yeah.
were the participants, who won, who went and hid. I have not seen that. I've
And-
seen
Yeah.
general histories, but not
Yeah, and
specifics.
things like the Filipino-American War, for example, that
Right.
always gets left out. And there's so many stories
which
in
was
there.
only recently reclassified as a war.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Yeah.
What
Another
else?
thing that we're seeing for kids and for young adults is, for kids especially, there are a lot of children's books and picture books, but they're all still very urban middle class kids.
Oh.
And the majority of Filipino kids aren't urban
Yes.
middle class kids. So we need more stories where kids who live in different contexts can
Kumbaga,
also recognize
representation.
Yes.
themselves. Yeah.
But in the
But
past
that's starting
2
to
or
change.
3 years, there have
There
been
have
a
been
lot
more.
more regional books.
And written in indigenous languages. So
In fact, we have a shelf now in the children's
Yeah.
room that's regional section. But again, that's it, children's and then adult. And then we're missing this
In between.
age of
And
books
that's-
in that language.
That's really a vital age, because that's when,
Yes.
they're on the verge of becoming adults and becoming what they are supposed to be. So.
And me, that's
Yeah.
like, for example,
and
me, that's
discovering
when
what means a lot to you.
yeah, that's when I read the most at that age.
Right.
Me, and all because there weren't any books available to me about here. All the books that I read were about somewhere else. And I mean,
Right.
even if it's about somewhere else,
And
like some
that's how we
fantasy
all
land.
became citizens of Middle Earth.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you mentioned that something weird always happens around Good Friday.
They bring in weird titles, or sometimes
And
they get into
religious titles,
or they
yeah.
get into arguments
With our
like
clerks.
with like the way our religious books are arranged. For example, this one has higher priority, so it should be on top, not underneath. this
Always
pile.
on Good Friday.
On Good Friday.
Once somebody became really upset because we had more books about Buddhism than we
And
did
Islam.
about Christianity.
Oh dear. Okay.
Buddhism and Islam, yeah. And then another time, another Good Friday, we had somebody come with a self-published book.
The evils of Christianity.
Yes, called The Evils of Christianity. And we felt very awkward about what to do with it. But we accepted it, right?
He left it there.
Yeah.
So we eventually sold it because.
And then he never came back. Because we didn't
he
buy
did come back recently
He
to
did?
collect and was insisting that we had sold it. So we said, okay, let's just pay him.
Let's just make him
But
leave.
just tell him we don't want any more.
Although, one thing I've learned recently is that those Wattpad books, they sell so many.
Yes.
Because the authors of these Wattpad novels, you don't even know their real names. They have their,
Yeah.
their handles. And whenever they announced that a Wattpad author had arrived, the screaming, it was like a rock star had appeared.
Yeah.
So
So that also goes
so people
towards,
do read.
Yeah,
Yes.
it goes towards debunking that thing of Filipinos
That's
don't
probably
read.
what the Harry Potter age group is reading. Wattpad novels.
Probably. And
writing.
writing.
And
they're
writing.
also
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah. So to me, books are my main form of sanity maintenance. As in, if I didn't read books regularly, I would have gone on a rampage already, and there would be a body count. Could you recommend books that help you to maintain an even keel, even in the most trying times?
Books.
That's
Yeah.
funny because when we started the bookshop, I actually stopped reading for a while.
Yeah.
Because we were just
It's like being a chef.
Yeah,
na I
buying
can't bear
so many
to
books.
eat my own food. Yeah.
that I didn't have time to read them. So we just keep getting books and then not reading them. So we were just talking about a book recently. What's it? Visit from the Goon Squad. And she's like,
Oh, the Jennifer Egan.
she's like, how is it? I'm like, I've
Because
had
I
it
know
on
she
my
had it, so I asked her.
Actually, this is weird, but I've also had it on my shelf,
Yes.
unread.
And you
Unread,
haven't read it.
exactly. So I was
and
like,
yet I have heard glowing reviews. So
That's
Yeah,
exactly
so I
what I
saw an
told her.
article
maybe we
that
should
said,
form a book club
Yes, we
devoted
should
to
read
Visit
it.
from a Goon Squad. From the Goon Squad.
because she found an article and then she asked me, so how is it? I said, critically acclaimed. I've never read it.
Yeah.
And so we have a favorite. It's a children's board book and it's really short. But like I always say, this is the most important book in the bookshop right now.
Which is?
And it's called I Love My Body. And it's written by Nikki Luna and illustrated by Julian. And the book is about owning your own body, bodily autonomy. It's yours,
Yes.
and that no one can touch it
without
asking
your-
permission,
Right.
Yeah.
without your consent. And that's
It's
one
really
of
an
the
important book.
important books for us.
Because it establishes that
Boundaries.
boundary at an early age.
And then what about important Filipino books that, everybody should read? Because, everyone's Filipino reading tends to end with Noli and Fili, which they only read because it was force-fed to them
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
school. So they don't associate it with pleasure, but with
Fun,
homework.
yeah. I love those books though. Those are like my favorite.
Yeah.
I
know
read them
someone
every
who-
year.
There.
That's me.
Okay, it's you.
Yeah,
pala.
and Carmen.
She reads them every year.
Another book. I'm
Nick
really stuck
Joaquin.
in Nick Joaquin.
Which particular Nick Joaquin? The stories?
Yeah, my favorite is
Oh, and
Mayday
you
Eve.
do
Mayday Eve.
Mayday Eve.
Yeah, we do.
Right.
Yes,
Tell us
every-
about Mayday Eve.
So we've
every
done it
year
twice.
on
We've done it twice, right?
April 30, no?
Yeah,
Yeah.
April 30, Gabe Mercado and Lisa Romero de Guia do a really good reading of Mayday Eve in the bookshop. And we always do it right before midnight.
So they end at midnight.
Yeah.
And then we have a mirror outside with candles that you can go do the ritual.
Yeah, and you
front
should
of.
plant a jablo. Na, here's the jablo! That's
jump
what you're going
out
to
of
marry.
It's such a great story.
Yeah, and people really come to
So
see
well
it.
crafted.
That's the one event so far that we're charging for.
I really like Gun Dealer's Daughter by Gina,
Gina Apostol, yeah.
Yeah. Like this poem, Will You Make It Fly,
Yes,
by
I love
Simeon
that.
Dumdum. Because that's one of the books where you get to learn about our birds, different bird species, and each poem is about a different species of bird that's seen in the Philippines and a different poetic form.
I just finished reading Patron Saints of Nothing.
Oh,
by
yeah.
Oh
Randy
yeah,
Ribay.
which is a bestseller here,
Yeah.
which was nominated for a National Book Award.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that's a really important book for kids to read. And see,
Yes.
that also fills in that gap of
Yeah.
for teenage
Yeah.
readers.
Yes.
Yeah.
By Randy Ribay, who is Phil-American, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, remember how was this at the turn of the millennium? Everybody said books are going to die
Yes.
because we're
That's
all
when we
going to have
opened.
e-books now, and so it's
That's
like
when we open.
I think that people have forgotten that they all bought Kindles and stuff, and they're going back to the hard copy. Why do you think this is so?
I don't know, because I can't answer that because I was never attracted to e-readers, so I never gave up on print books. The one reason I succumbed to an e-reader at one point was for portability. But
Yeah, the only time I wanted an e-reader was when I was reading War and Peace. I'm like,
God.
okay, I have temporary biceps now. I want a Kindle. Yeah.
We have something called the Declaration of Independence in our bookshop, where we've listed 10 things of what makes us different from other bookshops, independent. And one of the things that we have in there is what we call the social life of books, where we like to give books a social life. They don't just sit on the shelf. We want to bring them out, people to meet them. So I think that's one of the things that books have that e-readers don't, is where you have that interaction. So when we have authors' talks in the bookshop, partly because we're so small, they become so intimate and people really get to know the authors more. They get to ask more intimate questions.
you
And I
get to
think,
bring home a signed copy.
yeah, I get to bring home a signed copy. That's one
and
thing.
the
that-
memories of being there and talking to the author.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I realized that I can have like 10,000 ebooks in my computer, but if I don't see them all the time, I'm not going to read them. On the other hand, everything on the shelf in front of me, I'm going to read because I see them every day.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just have to be reminded of their existence.
Yeah, I have a 7-year-old who loves reading, And recently I found that the best way to give her books is to just plant them on the shelves. Like if I get her a book,
She has to discover them herself.
I don't give it to her. I just put it on the shelf, and then one day I'll find her sitting down with her face in this book. And I think that's part of the magic, is
Yes.
being able to look at a shelf.
Yeah, and also you have a
pick
sense
it
of
up.
ownership, like I
Yeah.
discovered this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the new bookstore is where?
It's on Yanko Road, corner Brent Road, so it's directly in front of the Brent School, Baguio. It's about a 15-minute walk from town.
Or less.
Or less.
Or
even.
a 5-minute walk from where you can get off a jeep.
It's a bigger space and you have more events.
Yes, we really needed more space for events because we were having to borrow spaces or rent spaces in other areas
Right,
already
yes.
because we couldn't fit everyone in when we
Everyone.
have a popular author. Or even just our open mics. So we have monthly open mics. And
Every third Monday.
every third Monday of the month. And we'd have people just hanging out na lang on the sidewalk outside. So
You
we
know, you
opened
should
that
have
up.
open mic where people go and they recite the worst poetry they have ever written. I would
one
go
of
to
our
that.
themes.
Bad poetry, yes.
That can be one of our themes. We do themes Like for a while we did featured authors. We'd choose a poet, and then we'd have everybody before reading their own poem.
They had to read
They had
something.
to select and read something.
So it
from
was a
that
way
poet.
to introduce them to authors also.
Yeah.
So we featured Luisa Igloria.
Alan Popa.
Yeah.
Actually, we started that event just to get people into the shop because there's some days where it's just empty, and then people started coming, and now there are several collectives that have been formed in Baguio that started out from Third Monday. Like,
Very
they
cool.
met there, and then they went and did their own thing, and they have their own open mic in different venues now,
Yeah.
and then they still come back.
Yeah.
And
Do you think that a bookstore like Mt Cloud would work in Manila? Because it's
good question.
it's ironic now. Baguio had no bookstore, so now you have Mt Cloud, and now we're thinking Manila doesn't have a bookstore like Mt Cloud. Not like a community bookstore where people hang out and.
I think part of the problem here is getting to the actual
Yeah.
bookstore.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like where would
Yeah,
we put it?
Because there
Yeah.
are a few independent bookstores in
That do-
Quezon City,
that do
in Manila.
events like that. I think near the schools it should be enough. That's one of the things we miss being further away from town. We don't have students that come during lunch
Wandering
break
in. Yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
Because we're further out, so it does take a
What
lot
you
more
need is a
time.
shuttle
Yeah.
from the center of town
Oh,
straight to
maybe
Mt
one
Cloud.
day.
Yeah, maybe one day.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
soon.
Thanks for having us.